Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of our/malicious compliance. Wanna discipline me for being right? I got you. I work for a freight delivery company, drive a semi-truck, and usually go out with 10 to 15 deliveries a day. Our policy is that when you deliver to a residence you have to take a picture with the work phone as an additional proof of delivery. That has morphed into now if the delivery receipt (DAR) says residential you have to take a picture of it, regardless if it's going to a business or a house. There are so many small details on a DR that can get missed, so this is an important detail. One day last week I have a delivery for Laura Lopez, name changed. It was being delivered to a construction company that Laura is an employee of. The doctor does not say it's residential. I make the delivery and leave, no picture. Next morning my supervisor says, "I have a write-up for you." Puzzled, I ask her for what. For the Laura Lopez delivery yesterday, it was residential. I explained to her that it was at a business and the DR did not say residential. She wasn't having it. I should also mention that her and I butt heads often and she's been trying to get rid of me for some time. I told her that we need to go talk to my manager about it, so we do, and he sides with me because she has no ground to stand on. This infuriates her. I tell her that under no circumstances will this be an issue again. That day is when I start my malicious compliance. I take pictures with the work phone at every stop. What happens is when I hit depart on the work phone it sends a pop-up to her computer with the picture and she has to acknowledge it before she can do anything else on her computer. I crashed her computer 3 times that day. At one stop I took 20 pictures. I get a call from her telling me that I have to stop taking pictures. I politely tell her that I'm covering my butt and not going against policy. "I'm giving you an order." I laugh and hang up. Sure as crap she wrote me up for it. I don't even argue, I say we need to take it to my manager. I walk in and he says, "What now?" I tell him the story, he looks at her, takes the write-up and rips it up. Are you seriously writing him up for overperforming? She had no words, and I still take a picture at every stop because I'm petty, lol. Next story. You want me to act my wage? Alright then. This was my first job a few years back. I was a working student at a startup as web dev. I was specialized in the field they deployed their software in as well as the use technology. The first year was great. I learned a lot, and though I had a contract for 20 hours I worked at least 40, more than a few weeks even 60. I identified myself with the company, with the product, with the people. Come another year down the road, people wanted to implement a feature. I raised concerns that I might be difficult to implement, given the software architecture at that point, and also probably useless because the metrics were a mess. The CEO told me to act your wage, and I thought to myself, alright, will do. I strictly committed to my 20 hours per week, didn't work a second longer. I updated my CV, got an interview and a new job, quit with a month notice. The company leadership was horrified and had to take actions I learned later. To hire a new web dev who could pick up work where I left they had to fire almost the whole sales department. My resignation caused them to lay off almost 30% of their workforce. By today the company operates with 35% remaining employees. Edit, I should also mention that clients ran off because the support line was not manned 24/7 anymore. That bug fixes took way longer and that new features were very faulty because I only implemented what was in the very badly described tickets. Next story. What professor asks for, professor gets. I had a hand in this malicious compliance, and it was rather nice. First, a little information. Back when I was working as a classroom technician for my local community college after I graduated, the college had a need for a technical scribe for a blind student. They needed someone who could not only provide direction of what the computer was showing on the screen that the Dragon software that audibly gave cues on what you were doing, was unable to, but also had the technical skills to also know how to work the software that was being used. I fit in perfectly, and so was hired on to do the technical interpreting for the student for the quarter. The professor assigned for the students to create a user interface that did some specific things. Well, the paper that he gave out had a general idea of what the students were to create. To help, but not overly help, I designed the general GUI, graphical user interface, and then let the student do the brunt of the work that Dragon functioned for, and I filled in the gaps by verbally cueing him on where he was, and what to do next because Dragon wasn't giving any cues. Student then turned in the assignment. Professor asks us to come to his office the next day, and says that he knows I did the GUI part, and it was the student's responsibility to do their own interpretation of what he handed out. I was about to explain, but the student grabbed my arm, politely apologized and said he will do as asked. We leave his office and I ask what's up. He replied, "Can you edit the settings on those laser printers in the computer lab to print a page of nothing but black?" I said sure. So, we do so, and after that black page was printed out, we went back to the professor's office. He said, "Well, that was quick." The student handed over the paper, and the professor was very confused. Student then spoke up, "You said for me to design a GUI based off of what you printed. This is what I saw, so I am giving you my interpretation of the image that you printed for the class." At that moment, the professor had a light bulb go off in his head, realizing that he required a blind student to give their interpretation of an image he printed for the class. He apologized, said the previous work will be counted, and for future assignments to proceed as we had been. He then said to the student, "Well played." Next story. Small malicious compliance, but very satisfying. English is not my first language, so sorry for any spelling mistakes. Years ago, when flip phones were the hot thing to own, I worked in a factory making paper. 6 people in each shift, constant watching the machine process, in case of wrinkles, tears or sometimes fire. Paper dust in the air had the habit of falling on fast-moving parts of the machines, and presto, almost instant fire. We usually several small fires every year, but nothing we couldn't handle. We had all worked there 10 years or more, so the trust were high that we did our work, and our floor manager, John, never had to direct us to do something until one really special day. Something to know about the factory: it was big. Really big. So north of it were a workshop with mechanics ready to help us and the other companies in the same building. East of us were loading bay and ramps for trucks. South were another company that laminated and printed paper. West of us were an area rented out short time. Sometimes a mess hall for showing products, and other times shop and warehouse for sport equipment. Everything under the same roof. This is where the problem began. After one of the worst fires we had, I were on vacation while my co-workers tried to keep the fire as small as possible until the firemen arrived. 3 people ended up with smoke inhalation damage, and 2 of them were okay after a few days. Paul, on the other hand, got lifelong damage. He could still work, but when a company repaired our floor, they used epoxy sealing of cracks, and Paul could suddenly not breathe. Team leader drove him to hospital, and after inhaling Bricanol, he could breathe again. We now knew how badly damaged his lungs were, and any strong chemical could kill him. I had years of experience working with strong chemicals, so it never bothered me, something that would come into play later. Months after this, we changed work schedule and our shift only worked weekends. Sweet deal, with extra pay, only hassle were the burners that would dry the paper. They could sometimes be a pain to fire up, as the safe nature-friendly LPG had problems to start in cold weather. No problems, while we waited for those to work, you could start the rest of the machines that were driven by electricity. Do you all remember the warehouse west of us that sometimes got rented out? Well, for some unknown reason, pressure perhaps, their ventilation pipe, were directly over the panels we used to control our machines. Sometimes we could smell leather of jackets being sold next to us. One summer they sold strawberries there, and after work, we all went there and filled our cars. Those strawberries were dirt cheap. One Saturday, someone had the bright idea to just rent the place for the weekend and spray paint their big lawn mover. We felt the fumes right away. You guessed it, big rush to the hospital with Paul again, and I had a nice talk with the guy. At this time, we were part of the European Union, and as I had worked with chemicals, I knew the papers you had to sign, the people you had to talk to, and the documentation you had to bring with the chemicals, just to take the chemicals inside a factory. He had none of that. We talked with the company that owned the factory, and they promised to never let this happen again. That promise lasted 4 months. When I arrived one morning, I saw that the chimney on the factory had no smoke. Odd, I thought, as some of the earlier guys usually fire up the burners right away as they could be tricky. After changing clothes, and ready to open the door to the workplace, I felt it. Nauseating strong chemical fumes, enough to melt wallpaper. I took a big breath, held it, and rushed to the coffee room. That was soundproof and had rubber insulation at the door, but inside I still could feel the fumes. Half of the guys were there drinking coffee, the rest of the guys had taken Paul to the hospital again. It was really bad this time. Everything were shut down as nobody could work with fumes like that. They had opened up every door and window they could, but it would take hours before any work could be done. They have talked to a new guy renting the west area, and he had apparently spent the whole night spray painting combine harvester, and all the fumes had gone directly to us. Now we come to the malicious compliance part, finally. While we are sitting there drinking coffee, chatting and waiting for the fumes to go away, in comes the floor manager. I have never seen John that angry, and while he never said so, I assume he got a call from the CEO that ripped him a new one as the numbers on the computer said we all were working and produced zero paper for an hour. John must have felt the fumes, but still chewed us all out, even after we explained about the fate of Paul. He was adamant that it wasn't tea that bad, and every minute the machine's done tea run is costing the company money. So I stood up and said to the others, "You two, stay and I go with John, to start up the burners." He followed me out, while I casually chatted with him, trying to look so unbothered of the fumes that I could. We had several panels to start, so I slowly walked to the first one. I felt the fumes, but I could handle strong chemical fumes, as I had done it before. It seemed like the burners were on my side this day, as they absolutely refused to start. Even when they struggle, they usually get the hint about what I want them to do in 10 or 15 minutes, but this day they were extra obstinate. When we got to panel number 2, John looked a little green in the face, but as he wanted us to work in the fumes, let us do that. Same problem with the burner again, and I looked at my watch, we had been in the fumes over 30 minutes now. Even I started to feel dizzy and nauseous by now, not that you could see it on my face. I looked happy as normal while working on starting the machines. When we came to the third and last machining, John gave up. He were white in the face and said with a low voice, "Perhaps we could wait a while until the fumes cleared up?" "Whatever you say," I said with a grin. John never yelled at us again, and I had a warm feeling when I think about that day. Fallout. On Monday the mud really hit the fan, and safety in the place suddenly became priority number 1. We had many visits from state departments. Sometimes in suits, and other times in white lab coats measuring this and that. Several machines had to be rebuilt with extra added security features. Work accidents went from 5 a year to just 1, or numbers like that, I am guessing here. It had massive effect and it probably cost a pretty penny to fix. Paul, however, never got really well again, but he retired early and got a hefty compensation, not only the pay he would have received for the years he should have been working until pension, but also damages, both from the company, but also from a special pot of cash the union had for moments like this. Not that it can compensate for lifelong asthma and inability to run more than a minute. Sorry for the long story, with small part of malicious compliance, but I wanted to get it off my chest. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.